And Liam, this is something that you've written about just at some length, actually, not just back in November, of course, when the story broke, and pointing out the sort of the skewing effect of the housing market as well, these big builders.
Indeed, my written and broadcast journalism has, for well over a decade, covered not so much the housing market, which all economic and business journalists cover, but the house building industry and the impact of the kind of structure of the house building industry on consumers and on house prices and the quality, indeed, of new build homes. Now, before that 2008 financial crisis, between about a half and two-thirds of all the houses that were built by small and medium-sized firms, companies with,
family firms,
10,
many
15
of them.
people, maybe up to sort of a couple of hundred people, family firms focusing on one particular locality, known to the community. A lot of those firms were wiped out during that financial crisis. The banks abandoned them, frankly. The banks would deny that, but many builders feel that they did. And a lot of firms then went bust and their land was taken, the industry was consolidated, and these really big house builders that are listed on the stock exchange, they took over. And a lot of people feel, including actually a lot of politicians now, that this is the reason why not enough homes are being built in the UK. It's partly about planning permission, yes, and the media focuses on all the rows over planning permission.
And the NIMBYs,
But there are many, Mark, planning permissions that are given that are not ever built, so-called phantom homes, because in my view and the view of any other housing analysts, the big builders sit on them, restricting the supply of homes deliberately to keep prices high.
And using like a land bank almost.
Well, they of course bank lots of land and that goes up in value. A lot of these massive house builders, they're really land banking companies, speculation on land companies, and they do a bit of house building on the side. But just have a look at the shortage of homes in the UK, Mark. I've got some figures here that I can show you. So back in the 1950s, we built 2.8 million homes in that decade, 3.6 million in the 60s, 2.5 million in the 70s. A big collapse. The 80s, less than 2 million. The 90s, throughout the whole decade, 1.6 million. The 2000s, 2010, 1.5 million. And since 2010 to 2020, just 1.1 million homes.
Down and down and down.
And yet, throughout that period, Mark, our population has gone up a huge amount. All the baby boomers, all the kids they've had, relatively high immigration, not as high as some countries, but still quite high. And my concern is that the big house builders are deliberately not building enough homes to keep prices high. And it so happens now that Michael Gove agrees with me.
Yeah, and the other thing that Michael Gove has spoken about, and others, it's the type of homes that they're building and the quality of it, the design, the architecture and everything else that goes into it.
It's partly that, but in the end, the price of it, the homes, is a numbers game, and no other country in the world has seen the kind of explosive house price growth that the UK has compared to actually wages that people receive. When I first bought a home in the late 90s, the average house was 8 or 9 times the average annual wage. It's now much, much higher than that, particularly in London and the South East, but also in other parts of the country too. And that's why Michael Gove asked the CMA back in November, the Competition and Markets Authority, he can't order them, it's a regulatory body, but as Secretary of State, he said, would you mind considering doing a probe into the house building industry if it's genuinely competitive, or if the big firms, which they deny, are practicing restrictive activities to limit the number of homes. And now the CMA, the Competition and Markets Authority, have indicated that they're mindful in principle for such an inquiry to go ahead.
And very quickly, what's the latest snapshot we've got on the housing market? I mean, a suggestion, I think house prices have dipped back a little bit, which is not surprising given that mortgage rates have gone up so much, of course.
Yeah, there has been a bit of a dip back in house prices. They're still much, much higher than they were a couple of years ago. They go up a lot and no one talks about it. And then when they come down a little bit, journalists tend to focus on it. But this is inevitable because the economy is slowing, or has been slowing, and people are concerned about the future, so they don't mind it to go out and buy a new home. But I'll be talking later to you, Mark, not just about house prices, but more about the CMA inquiry later this afternoon on GBNews. It's a very, very important story. It's complex, but it goes to the heart of why our housing market is the way it is.
Lovely.